Hey guys, this is gonna be a bit of a different video, but I asked and y'all voted, so we're gonna be rating some of my old animations today. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Kayla, but you guys know me as Beauty Snake. I'm 24 and I'm from the Midwest. We're gonna start in 2011 when I animated for the first time, and given the circumstances, I think judging these based on how well they demonstrate an understanding of the 12 principles of animation is a good way to go about doing this. Probably gonna have to switch things up once I get the fundamentals down, but for now, that's how things are gonna go. Lastly, before we get started, I'm going to be rating the years as a whole, at least until I get to college, cause I don't want this video to last forever. And dear God, buckle up for this one, guys. February 2011. I was 13 years old, having the time of my life on my school-issued Lenovo ThinkPad, my first ever drawing tablet. I had been obsessed with Speedpaints for a while. I wanted to know why the image was so crystal clear. Turns out they use computers for that. And upon getting my first laptop, I felt like I was finally in the same league. Like I could do stuff now that other people could do before, but now I know how to do it, and layers are a thing, so that's why speed painters were able to mysteriously erase their sketches without disturbing their line art. Anyway, I got madly obsessed with speed paints, and after making my DeviantArt account, I made my YouTube account, which I used primarily for speed paints. Actually, looking back through my old art for this video made me realize that I have this habit of brute forcing my way through a problem when I don't know how to figure it out. And so with speed paints, I didn't know how to speed up my footage. So of course, the most reasonable thing to do wasn't to look it up. It was to press fast forward in the video player and record that. So my first speed paint was basically just that. Thank God I discovered my computer had pre-installed Windows Movie Maker. You know, when you're a kid, you don't know your art is bad because you just like making it. I kind of miss that. But riding on the high that I had when I figured out speed paints and when I figured out layers and all this stuff was suddenly coming together, I moved my attention towards animations. The fact of the matter was, people could make their drawings move, and all they had to do was draw, which sounds amazing, but I didn't know how to animate. More importantly, I didn't have a way to sequence my layers, and 13-year-old me would be having a field day with Flip-a-Clip if she were here today, but unfortunately, free animation software was not as common when I was a kid. And of course, I don't remember how I came across this program, but I stumbled upon Microsoft GIF Animator. Y'all ever heard of it? No. That's probably because it's from 1996. Y'all, this program is older than I am, and I was using it to put together animations frame by frame. And forgive me for acting like 2011 was the dark ages. It was 2011, but there had to have been a better option out there. But I was too blinded by the appeal of animation, the making of motions moving. I was dead set on animating, and by God, I was going to do whatever it took. So, like all my art at the time, I drew my frames in paint.net, and I would export these frames one by one as GIF images, technically, and I would load them into this old-ass clunky program from 1996, in order. From there, I'd have to manually mark down each frame and how long it lasted, because there was not an FPS option. And then you get to preview your image. And at that point, if it looked weird or off, I was just gonna leave it like that. I wasn't gonna deal with that again. So, obviously a lot of my animations were like 2-3 frames long. This dancing cat is one of my first animations, and I only know that because the character was a Warrior Cats OC and something of a proto-persona. I think it was supposed to be Caramel Dancin', but It's kind of rough around the edges. It's, what, 4 frames? 3 frames? Yeah, there's a middle and 2 on either side. That middle is very offset. The other 2 are just... I'd consider them more graphics than anything. At least there was an attempt with animation in the first one, but the other 2, they're just flipping back and forth. I do, fortunately, have a handful of longer animations, which were genuine attempts. However, anything longer than 3 frames was very odd. Honestly, can I just talk about this cat for a minute? I know that I said I was going to rate everything as a whole, but I think in this instance it's justified. Hear me out. Honestly, what the hell? What the hell? This doesn't demonstrate any principle of animation. Is it animated? It moves? I don't think that's enough to call something an animation, though. Animation is about bringing life to lifeless things, and the life brought upon this cat is sadly one of pain and suffering. Such crimes cannot go unpunished. 0 out of 10. Thankfully, this phase with Microsoft GIF Animator came to an end when I discovered Photoshop had a built-in timeline. And suddenly I was able to preview my animation within the program. I obviously improved from that, but it's very hard to discern improvement in animation from improvement in art because my art was very underdeveloped at this point. That being said, I was still safe with my animations. I mainly only animated an element of a still image, like tail waggings or what would have been a wing flapping or snow falling. I also started doing this thing where I would, let's just use my persona at the time, her name was Leia. I would draw Leia, a still image, an illustration, and then after flattening that image, I would select a part of the body, like the head or the tail, and I would move that ever so slightly for each frame, creating this sort of bobbing effect. It was fine at the time, because it seemed like everyone was doing it, but looking back on it, I'll just say I'm glad we have tweening for this sort of stuff now. Thank God we've improved as a society. I actually started taking commissions around this time. I think it was mid-2011. I started taking commissions for these little things called journal dolls, which were pretty popular back when DeviantArt was still a thriving social media platform. Here's the thing. If my commissioner didn't tell me exactly what they wanted for the animation, it would just be random. So some of these were more animated than others. Wait, this isn't mine. Isn't this technically an animation meme? From like 2010? Yeah. It, in fact, is. And it looks like I wasn't the only one who traced. You get the idea though. Lots of little animations, nothing nowhere near as complicated as the spinning GIF. Obviously, this is like the early stages of animation where you don't really know what you're doing, but you're having fun doing it. So, like, there was a lot of improvement this year, but overall, a lot of what perceived improvement was done in the animation is likely primarily a result of improving in illustration. So, focusing specifically on the 12 principles of animation, There is clearly not an understanding of those principles here. I'd give this year like a 1 out of 10. Obviously, points are deducted for the cat, so 0.5 out of 10. Moving on to 2012. 2012 is similar, but with overall improved art skills. For the most part, I was actually trying to animate and not just make things move. Still, it was very, very simple. I was still on the journal doll thing. Fortunately, there were no just blinking animations. I actually... well, there's this one. But aside from that, they're fairly decently mobile. I even started branching out and doing connecting icons. I started taking these specifically, these lick cycle icons, and I even made a few crude animations. This one, God. I remember my friend being like, I want to commission someone to put my character in this base, and they sent me a base of an ass walking, or someone's ass as they walk, rather. And I was like, no, you don't need a base, I got you, fam. And I proceeded to show them this. Animation was still tedious, and I still preferred illustration, though it did help that I had a better understanding of how to draw than I did in 2011. Overall, there is definitely an improvement in understanding motion. There's some areas that make me want to believe I got better with timing, but timing and spacing are just one thing out of 12 that ideally one would know when they animate, so 3 out of 10. Moving on to 2013. Apparently, this is all I made this year. I have no memory of it. I don't even know who these characters are or if I finished it.
Started taking these.
But hey, I'll take it, because the only other animation I found in my DeviantArt storage for this year was whatever the hell this is. Again, improved art. I think that's blatant, but the animation has pretty much remained around the same level as it was in 2012. There's a bit of a better sense of easing, but it's very even overall. No real understanding of timing or spacing, no anticipation. Still has that new animator charm of adding way too many in-betweens, thereby completely neutering any semblance of life, and instead opting for the smoothest and most robotic animation. Let this be a lesson, kids. Frames are nothing if you don't know how to use them. 3 out of 10. I think that's fair. The animation hasn't really changed all that much since 2012. 2014. 2015 is when I actually started drawing people, and by people I mean I got really invested in Steven Universe and started drawing a lot of fan art for the show and stopped drawing furries. So a year before I had to go to college, I came in clutch with those human anatomy studies. I was still animating in Photoshop up until this point, but I had moved my preferred drawing program to Paint Tool Sai, and I would draw in Paint Tool Sai up until, I believe, 2017. So what I would do in these cases is I would animate in Photoshop and import it into Paint Tool Sai to line and color it, and then I would resequence it in Photoshop. I swear this sounds familiar. I don't think I actually considered animation as a potential career until this year. I was a junior in high school and I really had to start thinking about college. As I said, started getting into Steven Universe, so obviously this was the first thing I had really animated since 2013, at least that I am able to locate. I don't remember why I made this. There's somewhat of an understanding of easing and timing, but the animation is still janky and kind of robotic, and this could likely be because I did all of the lines in Paint Tool Sai where I did not have a window to preview my animation. Not long after I made that animation, I produced another one that actually took off quite a bit more. Ah, the good old Lapidot crack ship days. Things were so much more simple back then. I think it's quite clear that drawing people was still a very new thing for me, and I was still trying to figure out what the hell I was doing with my style. On top of that, I was still pretty on the fence about animation. I felt like I was having fun, I think, but it was really hard for me to tell because it was genuinely alien to me. That summer, I took a 3-week class on animation at the Kansas City Art Institute's pre-college art lab program, and I figured if I enjoyed it, then I would know for sure, and if not, I would just focus on illustration for college. And while I was there, I absolutely fell in love with the medium. I'm not sure what happened, but the tedium that I had previously associated with animation practically disappeared. I remember our first assignment was to animate 100 frames in a flipbook, and thinking to myself, fucking Christ, really? I think those 3 weeks got me to stop thinking about animation as a sequence of illustrations and start thinking of it as its own thing. I mean, 100 illustrations due in one night is insane. But 100 frames of animation, that's like a Tuesday. That's 4 seconds. Up until that point, my longest animation was maybe 30 frames. So I found that workshop to be very challenging in the right kind of way. Over the course of those 3 weeks, I would produce my first animated video of some kid smushing a lizard. I even found myself continuing to animate after the workshop ended. I know that I said I had been animating since 2011 earlier, but I don't think I actually saw myself becoming an animator until around this time. 2016. I definitely had a better understanding of the 12 principles after that 3-week program in summer of 2015. A lot of these aren't bad at all. I think that they're rusty. I believe that there could definitely be some buffing out that can be done, but you know, the elements are all coming together. There's clearly a timing issue. I mainly just focused on the poses and not the timing for each pose, and I think that's very clear on a lot of these. They could have been polished up quite a bit. Timing is definitely one of those big things that if it's done wrong, it's very, very noticeable. One thing that I noticed from this year compared to other years is I started exploring more with my animations and my motion. Even though a lot of them are just like quick little guys, a lot of the motions are things that I've never done before. I wanted to flesh out and work on acting with characters, so that's sort of what I can see here, at least, was my focus for this year, at least until I eventually went to college and became consumed by the void. "2017 was my first real year of animation class. Honestly, the animation department was lovely. You really bond over the shared trauma of being an animator. Going forward, you will see the most progress in animation I have made thus far. I hadn't really done any animation exercises to study motion up until this point. I'm not going to go over everything because this entire semester, well, the rest of my college life was all animation, but I will be touching on what I felt was the most helpful. You want to learn anatomy, you do figure drawing. If you want to learn animation, you start with the ball bounce. And ironically, our first animation was not a ball bounce, it was a pendulum. Our teacher encouraged us to trace the outline of a quarter and use a ruler for the string because he didn't want us to get distracted focusing on the volume and consistency over studying the motion itself. We also obviously had our own version of the classic ball bounce. Essentially, we had to convey the weight and material of 3 different types of balls: a ping pong ball, a basketball, and a bowling ball, using just the motion. We could not show the details. Or at least, as far as I can remember, we weren't allowed to add details that would otherwise give it away, so obviously reference was key. Next were the elements, and I pretty much learned as long as it moves like the element it's supposed to be, it's fine. Not to dog on the lesson or anything, but all of these are kinda ugly when viewed at just 1 frame. Probably because it wasn't meant to be viewed that way. Then comes these funky little cubes. I love them! I hate them! Ah! This was my first ever assignment to pull an all-nighter on, and I have very mixed feelings about it. Aside from that, I definitely think it helped me understand perspective and space, and moving through space. Which leads me to my next assignment. Our class was released into the wild to record reference footage that we could reanimate. The catch was it had to be movement through space. Fortunately, I actually found my reference footage. And for the sake of educational purposes, I can share it with you guys. However, to avoid any potential of getting doxxed, I blurred the shit out of it, rendering it useless. Next was our walk cycles. I have no idea why my teacher approved of this, but we were encouraged to explore our characters, so I guess there's that. We had to record reference footage for this assignment as well, and instead of recording mine before I started animating, you know, like a normal person, I blocked in the poses I wanted, and then I had a friend of mine do their best to act it out. Don't do this, by the way, that's not the point of a reference. In the past, I would line in Paint Tool Isai and color and stuff in Photoshop, but because of tight deadlines, I was like, fuck it. This is all Photoshop. And I was still lining this the night before it was due, and I had to color quickly and get everything turned in. That is definitely something I don't miss about college. My favorite assignment was the recontextualization assignment. The basis for this assignment was to take something that we already made and put it in a new context. And what I did is I tried out this sort of pseudo pixelation stop motion technique that I very, very much enjoyed. It was a lot of fun to make. It was fun to cut out and watch it come together. I had a lot of fun with this one, and I know it wasn't really one that showed a lot of significant improvement, but I wanted to include it because animation is more than just analytically studying motion. It's also about like creativity and stuff like that, and you gotta enjoy what you do. Otherwise, why the hell are you doing it? Our final that semester required us to reuse 3 assignments and add an additional 15 seconds for a total of a 30-second film. Since this semester was focused on understanding motion and I guess what could be called anecdotal physics, I decided to make my final film about the application of physics to the space age. I used my pendulum assignment for a Newton's cradle, I used my smoke effect for ambience, I guess, and of course I used my astronaut walk cycle. I really like space, so this project was a lot of fun. I also didn't know how to correctly render my animation at the time, so the file I turned in was about 1 gigabyte in size. Mind you, it was 30 seconds long. Yeah, my teacher called me out for that. 2018 marked the second half of sophomore year. We had fewer assignments that we got to spend more time on. They were also more prompt-based, so we could get a fair bit more creative with them. We had a handful of cycles that could be anything, lip syncs.
I trust you, Merle.
We even had this sort of shape puppet challenge thing. Shout out to my teacher for explaining to me what parenting was inside of After Effects because I was fully prepared to animate these bastards the hard way. This semester's final was fun. Basically, it was a map. It was a giant multi-animator project. We each got 1 to 2 parts from a poem that we had to animate. Our final project was a horrible mess and like 20 minutes long, and we had so much fun making it and watching it all together. I really hope the sophomores are still doing that assignment. I had 2 sections. The first one was very noir inspired. I don't remember why. Does it really need to have a reason why? Anyway, my second half was about a nun having an affair. I got to hone my bird animating skills with that one. All in all, sophomore year was fairly eventful. Started out more rough and ended on an arguably much higher note, which is what you want when you're trying to build a new skill. But I'm not too sure how to go about rating this. I guess fall would be 7 out of 10 and spring would be 8 out of 10. Clearly there are still some areas that I struggled in, but for the most part, by the end of sophomore year I could get by fairly well without too much suffering. And by fall 2018 I began to feel comfortable enough with the basics of animating that I didn't really have to think about it anymore. It was sort of like typing, you know? And since we began doing short films exclusively that fall, I'll just pick one and rate it based on overall appeal, instead of how well it demonstrates a knowledge of animation like I was doing before. And since there were 3 films produced this semester, junior year, and 2 of those films were group projects, I guess that helps me narrow things down. Behold! The last fully finished film you will see from my time at KCAI. There was some sort of interview process. I don't remember why, but we had to make films based on our interview. A sort of non-fiction narrative in big old air quotes, because interpretation was fairly loose. I mean, I made everyone birds in mine. I still have a soft spot in my heart for this project, and I still like the way that it came out even though I only had 1 month to produce it. My biggest gripe though would be sound design, which will be a reoccurring issue. I am definitely not a sound designer. I'd give it an 8 out of 10. It certainly falters with the sound design, but at the same time it's not like there's voice acting or anything, and the animation seems pretty solid. That spring, 2019, we each spent the whole semester on one film. Mine was about a lesbian who felt trapped in a straight relationship by her family. Yeah, I know, talk about emotional whiplash. I liked using films to explore art styles, and this film definitely had an impact on my art going forward, cause I use so many textured brushes now. I also started designing the setting in 3D and tracing over PNG renders to make the backgrounds. Honestly, this technique isn't perfect. You can't always get the same stylistic exaggeration that you can just by drawing from your mind. But that aside, it definitely made my life easier because backgrounds are the one thing standing in my way of animating. This was my first time actually working with voice actors, and by that I mean I got a bunch of my friends to pile in a car and record voice lines. I don't think anyone knew what the hell was going on, but that's part of the fun of filmmaking. I also learned the hard lesson of killing off my babies with this project. I had to chop an entire scene with backgrounds, rough animation, and voice acting for the betterment of the film. Again, weak sound design, but this has got to be the strongest film yet. I'd give it 9.3 out of 10. I can't ignore the fact that it's unfinished though, so I'm going to have to deduct a point. I started my senior graduation animation, Janice, that fall. Our school was very specific that it wasn't a thesis because we weren't getting our masters in animation. Which, I mean, I guess that's fair. Semantics aside, I decided to return to space with this film and made it a sci-fi. It was about a robot on a lunar space station on unnamed moon of Jupiter. Janice, short for Jupiter Assisted Navigation and Utility Station, was intended to be a waypoint that would use the gravitational assist of Jupiter for interstellar travel. The idea was actually inspired a lot by a conceptual study proposed by NASA in 2003 called HOPE. But obviously this is a sci-fi, so the twist is that Janice was building a portal in a massive underground hangar. The first part of the mission was to link the portal with the one back on Earth. Second part intended to bring heavier construction equipment through the portal to begin building a proper launch site. The portal obviously used an immense amount of power even when being built, which had to be collected from lunar resources. However, this led to a lot of seismic activity, and unfortunately the colony overseeing the portal construction was not built to handle that. The film starts with the last construction robot, who reports back to the Janice crew, not understanding their inanimate circumstances. He hears a transmission over the radio and follows it to find an astronaut. Pilot of the Hermes 3 had been sent to re-establish communication with the Long Silent Colony. Obviously, things don't go well and she needs to find a different way home. And then things really go south. It's pretty cut and dry though, it should be simpler. This is a 3-minute non-thesis after all. I was also looking at a lot of Goblins films, which set my standards way too high for someone who's soloing a not thesis film. Guys, this thing was over 6 minutes long, and it only had to be 3 minutes. Guess what? They say 3 minutes for a reason. A lot of my classmates had the same issue. Those of them who did films, because not all of us did. And I don't think any of us finished ours, and the reasons for which will become apparent soon. Let me just put it like this. If you're an animation student, don't be like me. 3 minutes is not as long as you think it is. That's a music video. If the story you're trying to tell is too long for a music video, it's too long for a senior film. I have such polarizing thoughts on this one. I love the art design, but I really shot myself in the foot with the amount of world building. And I honestly feel like the world building is somewhat on the weaker side. I think for the amount of stuff I tried cramming into it, I would have needed at least a full calendar year to probably maybe complete it. I had issues with the dialogue, more effects animation than I was capable of dealing with in the time frame, and I had like no budget to outsource any of these issues. Honestly, this film is in rating limbo. It could have been great had I finished it and hired a sound designer. Even ignoring the ham-fisted lore, but I don't see myself ever finishing this film, really. We will get to that soon. I had so many plans for after graduation. I have ADHD, and ADHD makes change really difficult. And when you've quite literally lived your entire life with a somewhat regular school life structure, the idea of suddenly being released into the wild can be kind of intimidating. To really make this work, I needed to coast on my momentum leaving school. But graduation was still a ways away, and hell, I'm an adult. It couldn't be that bad, right?
Oh crap, what's happening? Oh crap, what's going on? Okay, as I say that, dude, we are moving. Okay, I need it quick. We need hallway, and we have a... Where's camera malfunction? That's gotta be what that is. What is going on, though? Whoa, this is kind of cool. I kind of don't want... Wait, what? That wasn't what it is. What? Holy crap, what's going on?
Yeah, so I didn't get a graduation ceremony. And my first day as a free adult was the same as all those that came before it. We were in the middle of a pandemic. My roommate and I were dealing with moving. I had no idea what I was working towards anymore. So I just kept my head down and worked on Janice. This film was honestly a crutch. I'll figure my life out once it's done. Everything will be better once it's done. When I remembered that meaningless void of time that stretched out before me, extending now into the end of time, I went back to my film. When my film got to be too much, I went back to my film. I think deep down, I knew I wasn't going to finish it, because the relationship I had with my work wasn't healthy. But what else did I have? I was terrified I wouldn't animate anything if I stopped working on my film. Pro tip, don't graduate in the middle of a pandemic and expect to find a job. And when the burnout inevitably kicked in and I couldn't run from the soul-crushing weight of existing in my 20s, I started revisiting things that I liked when I was a teen. Chalcedony had been a character of mine since like 2014, but I stopped drawing furries ages ago. I brushed the dust off my Sparkle Dog and started drawing her again. I think I just wanted to go back to a simpler time. 2014 was a pleasantly uneventful year. I was happy drawing dogs and posting speed paints, but my channel had long since been abandoned. I had pretty much dropped off social media when I went to college. I was terrible at sharing my art. Tumblr was my biggest platform and it was dying. I wanted to start sharing my art on a platform that I actually used every day, and the only platform I could think of was YouTube. So that December, I revived my channel. The first animation meme I did was Bloom, because it was easy. Really. It was meant to be a break from Janice, and I was gonna go right back to that when I was done. But Bloom had been so refreshing that I wound up making another one. And another one. And soon I stopped caring about Janice, because I was suddenly having fun for the first time in a long time. Obviously, I was still very depressed, and for some reason I didn't pursue medication until fucking June, but I was just glad to have something new to look forward to. Something I actually enjoyed doing. I don't think those long projects are for me. If Janice has taught me anything, it's that I prefer bite-sized 1 to 2 month long projects. Anything longer than a year and I apparently collapse in on myself like a dying star. This video is way longer than I ever intended it to be. I'm not going to get into 2021. I think y'all are pretty familiar with my 2021 stuff. Reflecting on the past decade was actually pretty cathartic in a way. Obviously, this was intended for entertainment purposes and not meant to be used as a template for how to improve. If there's any takeaway, it's use a goddamn reference, so you don't wind up spending 10 years figuring out animation like I did. Obviously, art school isn't necessary for everyone, and the decision to go to art school or college in general is a very subjective one. It certainly has its ups and downs. Like, I learned animation at college, but I also started calling animated videos films. But I actually ended up skipping over a lot of the stuff that I did at college, just for the sake of time. If you guys want a more in-depth discussion of my experience in the animation department, let me know. Like the video if you want to see more videos like this. Obviously, I want to focus on animation, but I make next to nothing from YouTube on my animation, so I'm trying to rectify that by branching out a little bit. I honestly have no clue if this video will do well because it's so different from my normal content, but if there's enough of a demand, then I'll try doing more stuff like this. And since I don't know if that will be happening, please consider subscribing. We just hit 200,000 subscribers a few days ago, and honestly, your support means everything to me. I am still trying to figure out how to make a living off doing what I love, and this whole 100k plus channel growth is still very new to me, even nearly a year later. And I had plans for a 100k special, but that was back in May, and jury's still out on whether or not I'm going to finish that. So let me just say thank you so much for being here. 100,000 people is insane. And now that number has doubled. The fact that you took time out of your day to listen to me ramble about animation for like 45 minutes or however long this is just amazing. And the fact that you take time out of your day to watch my content in general is incredible. I am 24 years old and I don't know what I'm doing, so really, thank you so much for sticking with me while I attempt to figure out my career. If you'd like to support me more directly, consider supporting me on Patreon, and you can get a shout out at the end of my videos like these lovely people. And I guess I'll see you guys later.